It's June 29. Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform continues its operation. My name is Svetlana Shaparenko. Once again, I want to greet everybody with the Day of the Constitution of Ukraine. We want to thank the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Security and Defense Forces of Ukraine for the opportunity to celebrate this holiday for defense of our rights and freedoms in the battlefield. And right now we will be talking about the condition of the energy sector of Ukraine and about the preparation to the heating season. We will be talking to Volodymyr Kudrytskyi, the chairman of the board of the national energy company Ukrenergo. Good afternoon. Happy Constitution Day to everybody. We would like to tell you today about the current problems in preparation to the winter in the power grid of Ukraine. We would like to provide you with a brief update about what is going on in the power grid of Ukraine, so everybody is better informed in this regard, and we will tell you about how we will cope with those challenges that we are still facing since the latest missile and drone campaign performed by the enemy, and what are the risks that we're facing now. So usually spring and summer in energy sector is time of the scheduled maintenance of the power grid. It's the time when the power grid is being prepared to winter. This year, this period is very special for us, obviously, because in fact we deal not only with the scheduled maintenance but also with the necessity of the full-scale restoration of the generation capacities, those power blocks that were damaged and destroyed by the drones and missiles. I'm talking about hydraulic power plants and thermal power plants as well, and we have to restore the substations in express mode, so to say, because they were the main targets of the enemy during the last winter. So all of the power grid, apart from the scheduled maintenance, is undergoing the non-scheduled maintenance as well, respectively. As an operator of the power grid, we have less amount of power generation on hand, less than we would like and less than it usually happens. So due to those damage and destruction of the substations, certain capacities at the thermal and hydraulic power plants is still unavailable for us. Another problem we're facing is obviously the risks of further attacks and the problems with destruction of the transportation capacities, the mainway networks operated by Ukrenergo that we are supposed to restore in parallel with the generation capacities. So this process is underway. We need to get both operator Ukrenergo and generating companies. We have to raise the financial resources for restoration, because those works should be funded with the live money right now. A lot of equipment is being supplied by our Western partners, Western donors, as the humanitarian support, but obviously a major part of equipment still needs to be paid for. The works should be paid for too. The material should be paid for. So it's a serious financial challenge that we're facing, that our power grid is facing, to intensively prepare for the next winter. To get prepared in the best way possible, we as an operator of the power grid, we try to provide for the record pace of restoration. It's a record for us. It was uncharacteristic for us. During previous periods, we fulfill way more works than we used to do previously, previous summers and previous sprints. Well, it's pretty clear, I think. We also actively deliver and contract the necessary amounts of equipment to restore, to reconstruct our substations, and we also raise funds as grants and loans from our Western partners, our donors. It could they are represented by international organizations such as EBRD or World Bank, or the governments of countries. For example, in the end of the last year, we got a grant from the government of the Netherlands in amount of 70 million euro for restoration of our power systems. So we work in parallel, searching for the financial resources for proper restoration. Also, apart from the energy, another important role that can be played by Ukrainian consumer to help in preparation of the Ukrainian power system. I'm talking about saving of energy resources. I cannot help but reiterating it once again. We do our part of the work, but the civilians can do their part, specifically during peaks of consumption in the evening, starting from 7 to 10 o'clock in the evening, specifically during work days. Please save the energy resources. If you can, don't use the high energy consuming appliances, so we can cover those peaks of consumption during those peaks during the day, and thus together we can do everything possible to efficiently prepare for the winter. I want to ask you about some specific figures. What is the percentage of the power grid which is restored? You say now it's a record pace of restoration, so how much faster does it happen? Well, all that scope of works that we've planned, I evaluate it as, I would say it's about 50%. A lot of work is still to be done, but we have all the necessary human resources and equipment. I'm talking about the Ukrenergo networks here. As to the pace of restoration, I want to give you one simple comparison. Before the full-scale invasion, the average of what we installed using our contractors, well, we were replacing like one big automatic transformer per month. During the missile campaign of the enemy, this figure was 6 to 7 times higher, and we were doing it with our own capabilities, without contractors. We have more than 1,500 people working in our company who are specifically allocated for restoration of the damaged facilities of our power grid, the restoration of our substations, and we also try to help our colleagues from other energy companies. If we may allocate some personnel to restore this or that facility, whether distribution equipment, distribution substation, so we get engaged in those processes too. Well, you mentioned the deficit in the power grid. So what is the deficit? Well, I'm not gonna give you the figures of the deficit because that's as classified information during the wartime, but the sources of this deficit are known. It's a damage of the hydraulic power plants and thermal power plants. I want to remind you that no single thermal power plant avoided damage and destruction this and previous year, and obviously the restoration campaign is underway in thermal power plants and hydraulic power plants, but even in summer we have some peaks of consumption to cover the peaks created both by households and industry, but usually in summer we have some excess of electric power, a profit. Even previous year we were able to export electric power to the countries of European Union, but this summer and this fall we will have deficit in our power grid, so we will have to balance it at the account of some additional factors, and such additional factors, apart from the economy savings by the consumers, maybe the natural gas, generation from natural gas, and import of electric power from Europe. In the spring, we were scared, including by you, that there will be power outages, power shutdowns in the summer, but we witnessed no such shutdowns. Are they covered at the expense of the import or additional auxiliary generation? Well, we were saying that the shutdowns were possible, but we did not say they will be happening for sure. We were trying not to intimidate our consumers. We were forecasting the situation to be difficult, and it is difficult, regardless of the fact that we were able to avoid the shutdowns due to the lack of the power in the grid. There was a number of times when we had to engage the support from the emergency support from the neighboring grids. At certain point, we were in need of the support by our neighbors to balance the power in the grid. So there is a presence of such situations in the power grid, and this summer and this fall, to cover the consumption will be a challenge for us that we will have to cope with using different methods, but we count, or we expect, that apart from engaging some external help, Ukrainian energy companies will be using import. Ukrainian traders and suppliers will be using import of electric power from European Union. 1200 megawatts available for our system is the equivalent of one power block. Well, it's a good support for us, and I hope that economic conditions for the import will be created in Ukraine, specifically after the yesterday's resolution by the regulator. What is the most important technical help that Ukraine has got for preparation to the winter, and what kind of help do we still require? I think that the most important help for the power grid this year and last year is the defense of our skies. The air defense systems are the key factor to make sure that the power grid survives the next winter, just like it did previous winter, if God forbid the missile attacks will continue. And yet another factor is the supply of equipment coming as sometimes as humanitarian aid, sometimes it's new equipment, sometimes it's used equipment, something that can be found in the storage facilities in America, European Union, and Japan. It played a significant role for stabilization of a power grid last winter. Now the funding provided by our Western partners is extremely important for Ukrainian energy companies. For example, Ukrenergo was able to raise about 900 million euro of funding as either loans or grants, and we expect that by the end of the year we will be able to have this figure increased for another 100 million that we will invest in preparation to the winter. I cannot help but asking about the detonation of Kakhovka Dam. Maybe how did it influence the Ukrainian power grid, and how did it influence the aid that we're receiving from our Western partners? Well, the detonation of the dam is the environmental catastrophe. In the first place, is the destruction of important power grid facility that was out of excess, that was unavailable in a Ukrainian power grid within the last couple of months. There are certain risks related to the fall of the water level in Kakhovka water reservoir, which not only supplied the adjacent areas with water, those living in both West Bank and temporarily occupied territories, but also for a number of power generating facilities such as Zaporizhia thermal and Zaporizhia nuclear power plants, which are also under influence, which were also, so to say, affected by this act of terrorism. There were certain moments, specifically during the first days after the detonation, there were changes to the operation of Dnipro cascade that we were trying to adjust in coordination with our colleagues from Hydroenergo to soften the consequences of the flooding, but the main thing is the long-term consequences that result from the ruination of the power plant itself and other power grid facilities that ended up in the temporarily occupied territories, and we would like to have them engaged in operation right after the occupation, and we'll see how feasible it is after the occupation. What is your characteristic of the power grid of Ukraine, and what are the regions where the situation is the most difficult? Well, mostly affected by the missile attacks were big city agglomerations such as Odessa, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Zaporizhia. The networks, the power grids there were the main target of the enemy. The enemy was trying to deprive us of opportunity to deliver the power, the electric power, to those big cities, and this is where the power grids were affected the most. As to the Ukrainian power grid, we try not to abuse the publication of pictures from our facilities, but even in this studio you can see the pictures. You can see the pictures of the buildings, of the facilities after the rocket and missile attacks. In the same way, the number of missiles and drones were incoming to the power generating and power transportation capacities, something that was unprecedented in amounts unprecedented by humanity. Now we're facing an increased number of failures in our equipment, which was repaired and restored in a very hurried way. This is why the power grid operates in a less reliable mode. It works under conditions of the deficit during summer. Please don't confuse it with the shutdowns, because we cope with the deficit having our additional power generating capacities engaged, and we work under conditions of sharp, acute necessity of restoration before winter. This is why the summer and autumn season are not different from winter season for energy technicians in terms of workload. Dear colleagues, do we have questions on the floor? Good afternoon, Valentin Marchuk, Ukreninform. Yesterday the regulator set the new prices for electric power. How will it influence the heating season and the situation in the market? Thank you for this question. It's a very important thing in our situation today. Import is one of the most important factors so that we could balance our power grid in summer, in autumn, and in winter. Given the today's condition, the regulation in the market that is about to the price cap to be set in the market from the 1st of July during the peak consumption, when the prices grow in Europe, there is a price cap in Ukraine that, due to economic reason, does not allow those that import to come into Ukraine. On the other hand, the lower price, the lower limit stimulates the import when we really don't need it. We have some prophecy during those hours. For example, during a sunny weekend in day hours, when the generation is high in the solar power plants, we start getting power from the European power grid, and the prices in the European grid may be negative by then, but we have this lower cap that under which we cannot buy, which is unreasonable. So that solution which was taken, that decision that was taken by the regulator yesterday, we can evaluate its efficiency in July. If we see that there will be significant amount of imports in July that will cover the deficit, it would be desirable to have those additional amounts of energy, not to get natural gas blocks engaged, not to waste the precious natural gas resource. So it should be hundreds of megawatts incoming into Ukrainian power grid. In that case, we could say that that solution was efficient. Ideally, the price regulation in Ukrainian market should be just the same as in the neighboring markets, in European markets. So then the question of import will just disappear. I hope that those levels of price caps set by the regulator for the wholesale market will be sufficient for the import to start incoming. And I want to mention that the change of those caps will not reflect in the tariffs for the consumers. We're only talking about the wholesale market, the prices that are applicable to the businesses, not the individual consumers. Yesterday, Ukraine engaged the support from the power grids of Romania and Poland. What was the reason for this? We reported in the yesterday's summary, we gave a brief comment about this situation. In this specific case, it resulted from the emergency shutdowns of one of the power blocks at one of the nuclear power plants. It was a short-term event. Now this block is back in operation. There was a couple of times when we were forced to engage the emergency support because there was deficit we should cover at the expense of the power imported from our neighbors. But this emergency shutdown is a short-term measure for balancing of the power grid every day from 10 o'clock to 22. It cannot be used, obviously. There is a commercial import for this purpose. Well, getting back to the matter of the international support, Ukraine has signed a memorandum with European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, saying that Ukraine may receive significant financial support shortly. So what amounts are we talking about here, and what are the terms that Ukrenergo will be able, within which Ukrenergo will be able to receive this support? Well, the negotiations are still underway. This morning I had a meeting with the directors of EBRD about the price regulation. Such negotiations, they like silence. You know, I cannot give you the exact figure now. We're talking not tens but hundreds of millions of euros here. As to the availability of the funds, I hope that during the fall those funds will be available for us already. It depends on how soon we will be able to reach the phase of signing the agreement. I hope it's about to happen within the next couple of months. Well, is it going to be a loan or a grant from EBRD? I expect it to be a mix, just like it happened in the end of the last year. There was a grant portion of it and a loan portion. I hope in the same way it will be happening now. So what is the amount that we need to prepare for the winter season? You said that there is 50-60% readiness already. Well, I said 50-60% is not the amount of money that we were able to raise, but it's more about the works that are already accomplished. As to the amount necessary for our company to prepare is about $300 million. Dollars, obviously. Yes, thank you. And about the emergency support, the alternative of such emergency support was a shutdown. You report for the third time this month that you had to engage the emergency support. But for example, in case this emergency support is unavailable, how many consumers would be disconnected from the power grid? Well, I cannot comment because it's a theoretic figure. Well, the the emergency support is the last resort for balancing the power grid. And this is why I'm saying that we need import, specifically import, because the emergency support is something that we use in some emergency situations that are about to happen very rarely. If you engage the emergency support frequently, it means that there is import needed for the system. This is why the regulator has adopted this decision about the change of prices in the energy market, in the power market, and we will replace this emergency support with planned import, with scheduled import. And will Ukrainian power grid consume 1 to 1200 megawatts? And yes, I think that it's capable of consuming 1200 megawatts. But what is the condition of preparation of the power grid to the winter season? Are you satisfied with this preparation pace? Well, we have the biggest challenges faced in the areas along the front lines, and it depends mostly on the intensity of shellings and the density of mining. It's very difficult to work in some territories because Ukraine is the most densely mined country in the world for the time being. I'm talking about not only networks but the facilities. Due to the density of mining, the works are being slowed down in those facilities. As to the restoration of generation, there is the schedule, there is a plan for restoration, there is a plan of fulfillment of works in every single block of nuclear power plants. I'm not giving you the details of those plans, obviously, but we need to have everything that was planned for restoration, everything that is supposed to start working from the middle of October, to make sure that all of those facilities work. We have a question of line. Dmitro Sidorov, Energo Business. Today we're talking about unification of the spot markets of Ukraine and EU. According to the rules of that market, their power should not be traded a day before. What is the position of the government? What is the position of the regulator in this regard? I will try to translate it in human words. Well, now there is a trade of electric power between Ukraine and EU. There is Ukrainian market and the markets of the neighboring countries. They work separately. I mean, Ukrainian and EU. So when the price is lower in Ukraine than in European Union, and when Ukraine had this excessive resource, we could export this power because it had economic sense. This is the penultimate level of integration with the energy markets of Europe. The most advanced level of integration is when in fact we live in one market, not only physically in one grid but in one market, which means that Ukrainian consumers or Ukrainian traders or suppliers can buy electric power in the, say, from a Slovakian or Polish generator, or Ukrainian generator sells their electric power in the spot market to a supplier to the consumer in the third country. So there is a regional spot market created, and the market players from different countries, they have equal status there, and you don't have to sell excess to some area line because there is a seamless either regional or European market created. And we treat this idea exclusively positively, because this is the target model of our market operation. I keep reiterating that excessive concentration of power in the hands of players can be efficiently overcome only after those big players in the European market become smaller players in European market. Their scale will become smaller if Ukraine becomes an integral part of the European market. To unite those markets, so that a Ukrainian buyer could buy in the European spot market, and Ukrainian generator is able to sell in the European spot market. There is an extensive scope of technical works to be done, like connection to the European IT platforms that serve those European markets, plus adaptation of our legislation to the rules of the European spot market. And 80 to 90% of this work can be done between Ukrenergo and the neighboring systemic operators. Another important part of this work should be done by the operators of the markets in both Ukraine and Europe, and I think that now we will be moving towards this goal very actively, because there are all the preconditions fulfilled for this purpose. The only comment is that we cannot unite the European market with Ukrainian market with the European market if there are different rules existing in European market, not only about price caps, but anyway, the unification of the rules is the necessary precondition for unification of our power grid and power market. Thank you very much for your holistic responses. I'm reminding you, joining us was Volodymyr Kudrytskyi, chairman of the board of the NEC Ukrenergo. And at 2 o'clock we will be talking about the results of Ukraine Recovery of Conference in Europe. We will be talking to Alexandra Vasilenko, Director General for Economic Diplomacy and Sanctions Policy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. Stay tuned.